1 week season.
Hey, welcome in OWS fam. So glad you are with us. We are back in the DFS lab, as always, presented by 1 week season. As tonight we are attacking Showdown. It is Monday, November 4th. And tonight, in terms of brand name, we got a good one on hand, though these teams have faced some injuries. It's the 4-4 Tampa Bay Buccaneers going on the road to Arrowhead to face the 7-0 Chiefs. Chiefs favored by 9. As always, purpose of this show, build a lineup on DraftKings and use that as a way to talk through the slate for, obviously, in this case, the game upcoming tonight. I'm your host, Cheeseman, and it is my pleasure to welcome up Xandamere. Xandamere, how you doing, man? And how did Week 9 finish up for you?
I'm doing great. So it's funny, like Week 9, at first looked really promising because I didn't play Chris Olave or Drake London, and though we don't root for injuries, obviously, because that's horrible.
Of course.
They were both highly owned and they got hurt, and I didn't have them. And I was like, okay, well, that's a positive for me. And then everything went terribly wrong because like the Dallas Cowboys absolutely sucked. And like that was where most of my investment was on the Cowboys, and they were just atrociously bad. And so I was looking really terrible. And then towards the end of my afternoon only, I had some lineups that were starting to creep up, some Geno Smith stacks. And I just had a bunch of stacks built around that game in afternoon only, including some sort of ancillary plays like my DFS nemesis is one Demarcus Robinson, and longtime OWS members will know of my hatred for him.
Oh, I remember the night that he dropped those passes where
it was
shipped.
It was the first game of the season, it was like 4 years ago or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And he had a would-be touchdown pass literally hit him in the letters of his uniform and bounce off, and he just painful. Like whiffed it. And it was like $500,000 that I would have won with that. I held my breath, I plugged my nose, and I put a lot of Demarcus Robinson in my afternoon only lineups because I was stacking that game, and he's the wide receiver 3 on the Rams. And sure enough, Puka Nacua decides to punch someone and gets ejected from the game very early for decking somebody. And so lots more targets to go around. So anyway, long story short, I'm creeping up at the end. I think I was in 5th. The game goes to overtime. I'm like crossing. I had Geno Smith and JSN, and I'm like crossing my fingers though. Everyone else up top had them, and so I'm crossing my fingers that the Rams get the ball, and then of course Seattle gets the ball, and I was like, oh no. And they marched down the field, and they got like a 3rd and 1, and the Rams stopped them. And I'm like, okay, please kick the field goal, and they don't. They go for it, and I was like, no. And the Rams stopped them again, and I was like,
yeah.
And so then they get the ball back, and I'm trying to figure out the scenarios. I have Kyron, Cooper Kupp, and Robinson in this lineup. One guy above me, one guy had Robinson above me, one guy had Kupp, and nobody had Kyron. And so there were a bunch of scenarios where I could have won everything. Robinson ends up catching a touchdown to end the game. And so I end up getting 2nd, which is awesome, mind you, right? Like I thought I was going to lose a bunch this weekend. I ended up getting 2nd place. Which was $10K.
Which oh my God, dude. Nice work.
And to be clear, like, I don't want to sound obnoxious about it, right? Like $10K is awesome. It's a lot of money, but I'm entering like 5 to 7K a week, right? So like, it's not like it's a couple weeks of buy-ins, and that's awesome. I'm happy to have done it, but like, it's not like, oh my God, this made my season kind of money, like first place is 30K, 3 times as much. Yeah. I needed 7 more rush yards from Kyron, or 1 catch from Kyron, or 1 catch from Kupp. Because the guy in first didn't have either of them. He only had Robinson. And so like, the Rams drive was like 4 plays. It was like a pass to Tyler Johnson, a pass to Tutu Atwell. And I was looking going, oh no, this is horrible. Then Kyron gets like a carry, and then it's a long touchdown bomb to Robinson to end the game. So if they did a little more like methodical down the field, like in giving Kyron a couple more carries, like, so I could have easily won it all. And it's just, that's just the nature of the beast, right? Like, I always think like when you have a really good day in DFS, you're 1 break away from having had an absolutely amazing day, right?
Yeah.
Unless you win everything, which is pretty rare. So like every time you have a really good day, you're like, oh, just one last thing could have happened. It would have been so amazing. But at the end of the day, all we can do is be grateful for when we have profitable days, because DFS is hard, and
it is, man. Yeah, it is. You're completely right. It just like it's that one just thing flipping your way that takes it from like a 2 to 5x weekend to an 1,000x weekend, which is incredible. But dude, nice work. That is what was that on FanDuel or Owner's Box?
Yeah, that was FanDuel. Had some sweats on Owner's Box, but unfortunately did not quite get there. I had a Hurts and Devonta Smith stack that ended up in like 12th or something, but the Eagles just ran out of reasons to pass the ball towards the end. So
yeah.
After that, after Smith got his touchdown, they were done throwing. So alas.
Yeah, man. Yeah. For me, it was like I played lighter this week. I knew I was not going to have enough time with just other stuff going on. So I just kind of, I listened to the Slate podcast, kind of just put in a couple lineups. I had one cash, but yeah, just kind of was, doing it more for fun but I locked CD Lamb. I was also, invested in the Cowboys and just, I locked Lamb and, man, just, chased a Cooper Rush, couldn't get him there. Yeah. It's been that season. And the one game that CD Lamb has had a monster game was not on the main slate. So
I know it's the absolute worst. And you're just like, come on, really? Playing him every week.
Yeah, man. But there were some crazy things that happened. But yeah, that game at the end, man, that Rams and Seahawks game, for a game that was like 9 total points at the half, it finished with quite a flourish. So, dude.
Oh, I mean, it was like the key to winning the Millie Maker was a Geno Smith stack. Like most tournaments. Like most tournaments were won with Geno JSN stacks, and it's hilarious. It is funny because that was my, if you read the Oracle where like multiple OWS people talk about like what was their favorite game outside, to stack, like that was my answer. And I think it was either Hilo's or Mike's. I don't remember. It was someone else's, right? And so it's like, but for a while it looked like a disaster. It was like, oh God, this was a terrible call. This is dead, right? And then it just like it came out of nowhere. It felt like. So it's funny where it feels like it can be like the gap between failure and success can close so quickly, right?
Yeah.
Like I guess is what I'm.
And just from a game environment developing into something like that you needed versus like not, it just, that line is so thin, for the tipping point to be hit in a game suddenly, teams suddenly to get aggressive and start throwing it and stuff like that. The line is extremely thin.
Yeah.
So I hear you there. Well, let's jump into Showdown quick, but before we get into tonight's game, I want to pull up this lineup from last Monday. This was check this out, dude. 6-figure win from Gronk Destroys. He's an OWS sub. And this was very close to one of the lineups that you built on the show last week. How do you want to look at this lineup? What stands out to you?
Yeah. So remember, we talked when we did this show, we talked about thinking about things from the term of a portfolio of lineups. And we talked about how you would kind of, here are the plays that fit here, and you can sort of rotate through them. We had like combos and there were 5. There was Tyrone Tracy, who was an awesome play because I was very convinced he was really the RB1 and Singletary wasn't getting his job back. We talked about that and how low owned he, and I think I wrote him as one of my 2 or 3 favorite captains. He was 42% owned, but he was like a 4K or something running back RB1. I mean, he was, if people knew he was the RB1, he would have been 70% owned, right? And he was pretty low owned at captain. I don't know what, and you can't tell on the screenshot the way DraftKings displays it. He was 42% overall, right? But I think he was sub 10%, right? He was single digit ownership for RB1, super cheap. And then we talked about sort of the 5 core plays around him being the 5 big plays in the game of Neighbors, Pickens, Russ, Najee, and Daniel Jones. And we talked about how you can sort of rotate through those, right? Like you can play 4 of the 5 in a Tracy captain lineup. So you can rotate through, and then you just find that one other piece. And the one other piece is Calvin Austin. And the interesting thing about this lineup is this looks, and I'm not 100% sure, but the fact that it's 100K even makes me think this was a solo finish, right? Just because it wasn't divided. Normally when you have ties, it's like divided off into like the single dollars and cents at the end. So I think this was a solo win. But he didn't play anything that outlandish. Like, it's not like you found some 2% owned tight end 4 who caught a touchdown, right? Like he played the RB1 of each team, the one quarterback, and the wide receiver 1 from each team. And then he found Calvin Austin, who was the wide receiver 3. But it's not like he was some guy who's never on the field. I mean, he was 14% owned. I think he returned a touchdown too. So he had the very rare double dip scenario of the receiver who catches a touchdown and returns a touchdown, which is really funny because he'll talked about that for years, like a strategy in DFS, and it never hit. Playing the defense but then actually Khalif Raymond did it last week too. So 2 guys did it last week, caught a touchdown and returned a touchdown. But anyway, like, it's not that uncommon of a lineup, right? Like he had 5 strong, very straightforward, highly owned plays, but he played Tracy at captain, which was the unusual thing, right? And so sometimes it's not about just the ownership of the individual plays, it's the construction of the lineup that gets you the differentiation. In this case, and I think, this is off of memory, but I'm fairly confident there was some salary. No, maybe not. I think there was at least a little salary left in this one because Austin was really cheap. And Tracy would have been like 6 to 7K in the captain spot. So I think there was some salary left, which also, like, if there were players who projected for more than Austin, who you could have put in that spot, they would have, like, that's where the duplication would have occurred, because that's what optimizers would try to shove in that last spot as the highest projected player. So, having Austin, so that's a common trick in Showdown, right? Is like build a really strong top to bottom lineup that projects really well, and then take one guy out and replace him with someone who projects worse, who's a fair bit cheaper. Because what optimizers, like, people need to remember that what optimizers are trying to do, they're trying to solve for how do I build the highest projected lineup within the series of constraints that you, the user, give for me, right? And so, like, the salary is a constraint, position's a constraint, any rules you set are a constraint. And so the optimizer is just trying to build the highest projected lineup. And so if you figure out a way to say, well, I'm going to take this guy who projects the best, and I'm going to move down to this guy who's half a point less, you're going to get a lot less duplication by virtue of one simple change. And of course, Calvin Austin had a huge game, but like the lineup was really, really sharp. He didn't have to play any like wild plays. He just had a well-constructed top to bottom lineup with strong plays that we talked about. Found the one guy, fit in around them, but built the construction that got it to, uniqueness. And he also won. He won another tournament with the same lineup that I think was duplicated, because he shared the other screenshot, and it was like that was an odder number, right? It was a number that looked split. But he's also been awesome. Like, he has been. It's not the first time I've seen his name pop up in the Binks channel. Like, he's been playing really, really well. He's a very good player. So, but super happy to see it, and it's cool to see what we talk about on here, and then see somebody win something with that basic structure. Like, that's so awesome to see happen. I love seeing that stuff happen.
Yeah, and it tells the story of the game. Obviously it's not as common to see I guess actually no, I'll take that back, because I was going to say, like, to not have a quarterback for the Giants in here, Daniel Jones, but that's more if you have a receiver captain. Typically the quarterback would be with him, but this is a running back captain with a receiver, so that definitely can get there. But one thing with this is, we talk about just like building portfolios of lineups. I'm guessing, I don't know. I'm guessing this wasn't a single entry for him. He probably built multiple, because how do you settle on a Calvin Austin if you're just playing single entry? Maybe you do, but I mean, briefly kind of give a little summary of like how you optimally build. If you're building multi-entry, it's like you kind of want to like give 3 or 4 different scenarios that you build into the optimizer, right? And then would you run it would you run the optimizer 4 different times with 4 different sets of rules, and just kind of try and spit out lineups that way? But it just more generally, those 4 different or 2 3 different scenarios that you're building like 20 lineups a piece with those.
So you actually hit on it, and I think this is a really interesting point for anyone who builds a lot of lineups. And I think anecdotally, I don't think most people do this. I think you generally want to run the optimizer to build each clump of lineups based on each scenario you're building for. And so on main slate, for example, this scenario would be like which quarterback you're playing, for example. In Showdown, it would be like you could do it based on, depending on how you're building, you could do it based on the captain. You could do it based on I'm building 5-1 onslaughts right now. You could do it based on I'm building for a shootout versus building for a one-sided beatdown versus building for like a low-scoring under game. But I think that generally you want to run the optimizer for each different set separately, because that makes sure you get the exposures you want that are allocated across the sets. And so what I mean by that is, so Let me give us a really simple example on main. It's easier on main slate for me to think of this example. So on main slate, let's pretend that you are using two quarterbacks, and let's pretend that one projects better than the other. One's the like common highest projected play, the other is the contrarian lower projected play that you think is interesting. Let's also pretend that you're only using two tight ends. One is the higher projected tight end, it's Trey McBride, who projects really well in a great matchup, and the other one is like, I don't know, Taysom Hill, who doesn't project well, but you think he's an interesting contrarian play. So if you just run your optimizer 150 times, what's going to happen is that your high projected quarterback is going to be paired the majority of the time with your highest projected tight end, because again, the job of an optimizer is simply to build the highest projected lineup within the constraints that you have given it. Yep. And so if you don't set your constraints correctly, then what's going to happen is you're going to end up with what's called a clumping problem. So your highest projected quarterback gets clumped with your highest projected tight end, and your lowest projected quarterback is clumped with your lowest projected tight end. And so if you build 150 rosters, you have 75 with your top quarterback and 75 with your bottom quarterback. And so you'd think that they would have an equal number. Each would have an equal number with each tight end. It might be what you want to have happen. But what you actually have happen is, you have 80% of your Trey McBride exposure is tied to your high projected quarterback, and only 20% goes to your low projected quarterback because of how the optimizer works. And again, there's more complexity involving salaries and other rules you've set, right? But it's way easier to me to say, hey, I want 40% exposure to Jalen Hurts this week. And so I'm going to build 150 lineups. So I'm going to run 60 Jalen Hurts lineups and see how my exposures are around Jalen Hurts, because I want to make sure that I get the right exposures to the running backs that I want and the other wide receivers that I want and the tight ends that I want.
Yes.
Because otherwise you end up with this clumping problem where like you have a bunch of your Jalen Hurts rosters get paired with a bunch of a bunch of plays at a very high rate. It happens with salary. So like if Jalen Hurts is expensive, you're going to end up getting paired with like the best value play on the board is going to be paired with Jalen Hurts at a very high rate. You may not want that. You may want to diversify that. So building them separately in chunks based on each scenario, like each quarterback for main slate, each like game scenario and showdown, I think is a way to make sure that you're getting the exposures you want spread out appropriately, as opposed to having this like clumping problem. And if you don't believe me, or if you just want to see it, just go run the optimize. Like go, check a few players you like at each position and just hit run on an optimizer, and go then look at the lineups and watch how you might have 50, like if Cooper Kupp is the best projected, wide receiver on the slate, he's going to be in and you have 50% of him, he's going to be in the top 75 lineups, and he's not going to be in any of the bottom 75 lineups, right? Because that's how the optimizer builds. It's going to say, especially if you try to if you try to manually set exposures, and you're like, well, I want to cap Cooper Kupp at 50%. Lineups, the optimizers will say, cool, he's the best player on the slate, so I'm going to put him in every lineup until I hit that cap you've given me, and then I'm going to put him in 0 lineups after that. And so you end up with this clumping factor that's, if you're an MME player, it's really, really destructive. So it's really important to learn that. And so I'm really glad you asked that question, because I hadn't actually thought about that in a long time. I just kind of do it by nature now. But yeah, definitely, if I'm building for Showdown, I will, depending on it depends on how I'm building. Sometimes I'll do it based on captain, where I'll build each set based on the captain I'm using. Sometimes I'll do it based on the number of players on each side. Sometimes I'll do it based on, a player I'm locking. Sometimes I'll say I want, 50% of, I want to build some onslaughts that all have the defense locked. And so I'll do that. I'll build the defense locked onslaughts and build those, right? To figure out some way to, however you're splitting up your strategy of how you're allocating your entries, you figure out some way to split them into groups, and then build each group by itself is my strong advice.
So if you say you're entering 150 lineups for you personally, obviously I'm not going to ask you to give away all your, top secret strategies, but what would you say is the most scenarios you've ever built for in say 150 lineup set?
I mean, okay, that's a loaded question, because the most is probably 10 back when I sucked at this.
Wow.
But back when I didn't know what I was doing, right? I would say now it's maybe 3.
Okay.
Because here's the thing, one lesson I've learned is it's easy to go into Showdown and think there are so few players compared to main slate that you can try to just cover all the bases. You can't. right? There's still
it's crazy to say, but you're totally right. Yeah.
There's still a tremendous. I mean, it's easier on FanDuel with 5 slots and where the captain doesn't multiply the salary. But even there, it's still like you can't cover every base, so you have to be willing to lose, right? And we actually have a call Larejo on our site writes a column called "Willing to Lose," which is great because it's a critical part of being a tournament player is being willing to lose, and what that means is, you need to recognize that there are going to be outcomes on any slate, whether it's main slate or showdown. You cannot cover everything. And so you're just going to say, if this happens, I lose, and I'm okay with that. And I hope it doesn't happen, but it might. And if it does, then I'll see you next slate. And the thing is that some people don't like to do that. Like they like to spread their risk around. And what happens then is if you try to cover every base, you try to spread your risk around, get a little bit of everything, then what happens is you're going to be one of those players who every week is like, oh, I had all the right players, just not in the right lineup. Well, it's like, no shit, because you had so many different players that the odds of having them all in one lineup were 1 in a million. They were infinitesimal. It's better. And what happens is you'll end up with a slow bleed of your bankroll unless you get lucky. But effectively, what you're doing is you're like throwing darts at a dartboard, hoping to hit the bulls. You're blindfolded throwing darts at a dartboard, hoping to hit the bullseye, and you will once in a while by luck. Right. But that's not a sustainable strategy in my mind. Right. Like to me, that's not a sustainable strategy. You're just going to bleed bankroll slowly every week. You won't get wiped out. You won't have weeks of zero return. Right. You're always going to get something back. You're always going to cash something because you have exposure to everything. But your odds of actually winning are lower. Whereas for me, I'd rather take a much more focused approach where I say, this is where I'm building my stance around. And if these miss, I will lose. And so be it. And that means I lost this week. But if these hit, now instead of having that, instead of having one of my 150 lineups that has a reasonable sweat and I'm hoping to still beat out hundreds of other lineups to get to the top, now I have 25 lineups near the top or 20 lineups near the top. And I have a lot more different paths to actually have one bubble all the way up to first place. And I've had some nights, actually a couple nights last week, I think, or maybe the week before, in NBA, I had a night where I think I had 4 of the top 10 spots in a tournament. Because my core hit, and but there's also nights where my core misses and I lose every penny I put in, and that to me, that's the better strategy long term because the real money's at the top, right? You've got to play for first. The difference between first and second or first and third is enormous. So you want to give yourself as many chances to get to first when you're right about your core plays.
Yeah, absolutely, man, and it takes some getting used to that. Willing to lose mentality. It takes some getting used to be able to say, obviously you want to study for processes working. And if you're, losing everything you put in constantly, then it's probably like, that's, something's not right. But when you do have nights where you literally lose everything you put in, you got to be able to kind of swallow your pride and say, you know what, it just wasn't, I know who I am as a player and there's going to be nights like this and I have to move on. So
it sucks. I'll tell you when I figured that out, by the way. It was years ago. It was early Showdown. It was really I think it was the first year of Showdown. And I had been having a really bad season so far, really bad. And I was down I was almost having to redeposit on DraftKings, and I hadn't had a deposit on DraftKings in years. And I was almost having to redeposit. I was like, should I even redeposit? And anyway, I had enough to enter the Showdown contest, to max enter the Showdown contest, and it was the Patriots and somebody. I don't remember, but anyway, the Patriots running backs were all dead, and they were all out. And Cordarrelle Patterson, they had Cordarrelle Patterson, and this was before Cordarrelle Patterson had regularly started being used as a running back, like the Falcons used him. But he's on the Patriots, and I was convinced that there's a good chance that Patterson was going to get 10 to 12 carries plus some targets. I thought that there's a good chance they'd use Patterson as their running back instead of whatever practice squad dude they called up. And I was sitting there and and I ended up locking him. I ended up having 150 lineups of Cordarrelle Patterson. And he was 7% owned or something like that. He was low, right? Because he wasn't a chalky play. And anyway, as the tournament was winding down, I literally had I was tied for first, I was tied for second, I was tied for third, I was tied for fourth, I was tied. I had every possible combination. And so basically anything that happened in the game, I would win pretty much. Like there's just, almost anything could happen. And like, yeah, it might knock my current lineup out of first, but another one would end up in first. And like, I probably had 15 different lineups bounce in and out of first place throughout the fourth quarter, but I always had one in first. And that was kind of when I realized I was like, oh, this is the key that I've been missing. Like this is the key that I've been missing, is that willingness to, when I feel I've identified the right spot,
good,
the willingness to go all in on it and recognize I'm not always going to be right, and that's okay. But like, it's like when you found the edge, you push your chips in, right? So
I love that, man.
That was the moment I figured it out.
Story, dude. That is fantastic, and I love how you kind of brought that home. That's good stuff, dude. Okay, with that, let's jump into tonight and look at this Tampa Bay game. Where am I at here? Yeah. Okay. So, Tampa Bay, Kansas City, Showdown Captain Mode tonight. Let me just jump in to a contest here.
Excuse me.
Oh yeah, you're good.
Yeah, we're already running. I feel like we spent so long just chatting on other stuff.
Hey, but yeah, I feel like valuable stuff. And got the chapters anyway, so people, if they want to get to the game, they can, but really good stuff. So yeah, where do you want to start this one though, man? I mean, Kansas City obviously favored by 9, injuries hampering the Buccaneers, a lot going on here.
So I'm going to have to move a little quick through this. So I'm going to save a bit of if you want all the exposition on this game and like all the thoughts on the game, like go read the article on the site. But the TLDR here is that this game has a really big player pool because both teams operate deep offensive rosters, right? Like, especially the Bucs right now with like everyone dead on their team. But like, the Bucs are using they had 3 running backs in the field. They had 4 wide receivers in the field. They had multiple tight ends in the field last week. There's question marks around 2 of the Bucs pass catchers right now. And Bucky Irving, who's almost certain to play, but like, McMillan and Shepard are both questionable. So it's just like there's a deep roster of players you can consider. And so what I do when I encounter this scenario is I try to like lock down what I think are is the best possible core of plays, and then kind of rotate all these like rando dudes. Like it's really hard for me to have a really material distinction between Jalen McMillan and Sterling Shepard and Trey Palmer. And like, I can say, here's what they did last game, but like, is that material for their chances of what they're going to do the next game? Who knows, right?
Yeah, probably not.
And the Chiefs have all these rotational guys. Like they've got, Worthy, who plays a lot, but like can't catch a ball to save his life. But if he catches one, he might just run it to the end zone from anywhere because he's fast as hell. They've got like Hardman, who they use like this weird gadget guy at the end zone, but he's barely on the field. Like they just have all these guys. And so for me, the core plays in this game, and there's more than will fit in one roster, but the core plays, Kareem Hunt, who is not particularly good, but the role is huge. He's had more than 20 touches in every single game since kind of becoming the full running back after his first game when he had, and he's kind of still getting a bit of speed. He's had 20 touches in every game. So he's like, the role is huge. They're 9-point home favorites. Like he is absolutely a core play for me. Travis Kelce is underpriced, and it seemed clear to me early in the season that they were kind of babying him a little bit. And I don't know if that was like, they were trying to protect him from the playoffs. There was some talk about that. If it was that, it could have just been randomness. Who knows, right? But the last few games, like 12 targets, 5 targets, 10 targets, 9 targets, like he's clearly being utilized heavily. And that started when Rashee Rice went down. It was that Chargers game where Rice got hurt really early, that he got 9 targets. So Kelce is a little underpriced. Good matchup, right? Like best pass catcher on the field for either team, really. He is a core play for me. Patrick Mahomes has not been especially good this year. He's thrown more interceptions than touchdowns, but like, because the Chiefs are still a good offense, like he's still managing to put up scores that are pretty showdown relevant. So I wouldn't play him on main slate. I've not played on main slate once this year, but like he's still showdown relevant. So like he's a core play. Baker Mayfield continues to impress and get it done, even though, I mean, he put up 27 points last week with like a cast of nobodies as his receivers. Yeah. So he's a core play. And then the running backs, the Irving and White, I think are core plays for me. they absorbed a lot of the passing volume last week. They're going to continue to absorb a lot of the passing volume. And then like some of the guys like Butker, right? Butker is a core play because he's a home kicker on the high total team. Chiefs defense is a core play as one of the league's best defenses against an offense that's missing all of its good players, basically. So like that's like my core play list. And so like what I want to then do is then figure out how to rotate guys through that core play list. Around it, similarly to how we saw last game, where like the core plays were Tyrone Tracy. For me, the core plays that last game were Tyrone Tracy, the Steelers defense, the Giants defense, the kickers, and then the 5 expensive guys, like the two was Pickens, Neighbors, Najee Harris, and the quarterbacks.
Yep.
And then like rotating plays through that, right? So that was how the Calvin Austin thing happened for Gronk, because I assume he was doing the same kind of thing. But like, that's the same strategy effectively that I want to play here. And so where I'm going to start here, and I know this, exactly where I have to go to make the salary work, because I've done it. So I actually have my lineup built in advance. Hooray, go me. I'm going to start with Travis Kelce at captain. And I think my instinct, and I could be wrong, I haven't actually done all the ownership calculations yet, but my instinct here is that Hunt will, I think Hunt and Kelce are similarly, they have similar ceilings. I think Hunt's floor is higher, but I think they have similar ceilings. I think Kelce is going to be lower owned at captain than Hunt, because I think that Hunt's role is so big and people will be attracted to the 9-point home favorite running back as a captain. And Hunt's a fine captain choice, but this lineup, I'm starting Kelce. It also fits better, and I'm trying to intentionally differentiate a little bit from core builds that optimizers are spitting out, which involves not so much Kelce here, but the last couple of plays. I'm trying to figure out a way to get around the optimizer build and get away from them. So we're gonna start with Kelce, but I think Kelce, they don't have a lot of guys to throw to. Like DeAndre Hopkins is new to the team; his role will ramp up. But like outside of Kelce, like Worthy can't catch. Who else do you throw to?
Yeah, I mean that's been their problem. Yeah, you're right. So I mean, even though Kelce is getting up there in age, yeah, who else?
Yeah, but he's still delivering, right? He had 12 targets last week. He had 10 against New Orleans. I think I think they might have been taking it easy on him early in the season.
Yeah,
but I also think they need to win games, and they need somebody to catch the ball. So
yeah, maybe he's still getting into shape. I know he was doing he was busy over the summer.
He's flying over the world. He's a very busy man.
Yeah.
His brother's beating up people with cell phones, which is hilarious. Well, beating up people's cell phones more specifically, not beating up people.
Yeah. They're an entertaining family, that's for sure.
They're hilarious. Okay, now we're gonna go Patrick Mahomes. And I've kind of poo-pooed on Patrick Mahomes not being very good this year, but at the same time, like he's still one of the highest raw projected players on the slate. And if we believe Kelce has a really strong game, that increases the likelihood that Mahomes has a strong game, right? Like, I don't believe that you must play Mahomes with Kelce captain, but the odds are that if Kelce has 100 yards and a touchdown, that pulls Mahomes along at least somewhat. And then we're going to add Kareem Hunt. And so this is like the core of the Chiefs offense to me, right? It's their best pass catcher, their quarterback, and their running back. Hunt's workloads have been absurd, especially for guys' age. Like, honestly, like, it's weird. Like they're running him into the ground. But like, hey, good for him. He got an NFL job. I think he was either a free agent or a practice squad or somewhere to start the season. I don't remember, but he wasn't on a team, right? He wasn't on an active roster. So good for him finding a job like that, right? And he's done reasonably well. So we have the core of the Chiefs offense, right? The high projected home favorite. We've got the core of the offense. Like that's a comfortable start to me. And then the next pick we're going to add in is the last piece of the Chiefs offense, which is Harrison Butker. So this gives us the other way the Chiefs score, right? Like with this combination of 4 players, I feel pretty confident that when the Chiefs score points, we will benefit, right? Like, do we get it exactly right every time? Not necessarily. Like Mahomes could throw a touchdown to someone else, but generally speaking, when the Chiefs put points in the scoreboard, we're probably benefiting with this combination of 4 players. These are like my 4 core Chiefs, and now we have 11,800 left. And so I think what would be common in this scenario is what you would often see is somebody going something like playing like, I don't know, a Jalen McMillan and a Sterling Shepard, or something like that, like 2 mid-tier plays, or playing like a Rashad White or a Bucky Irving, and then a slightly cheaper guy like a Trey Palmer. That's what I think the common thing will be here. But I think there's kind of a sneaky, and I hope he remains sneaky, I think he's a bit of a sneaky buck out there. So we're going to plug him in, and that is Rakim Jarrett.
Did not even like that. Rarely this happens, but especially with these scrubs, certainly it happens. But I never heard that name. Had never heard that name.
You show some respect, my friend. Rakim Jarrett is I don't know who he is. I honestly he had 9 targets last year.
No idea.
No idea
who he was. No, yeah, man. I thought you were about to say like, this dude is like, he. I don't even know. I can't even. My brain is not there right now.
He was an undrafted rookie last year. He was not some heralded prospect. Yeah. But here's the thing: he was the guy. And look, the Bucs receiving core is thin, right? Some of these guys wouldn't make rosters at their places, but
very thin.
But Rakim Jarrett was on the field for like 20 something off the top of my head, 20 something % of the snaps last week against Atlanta. But he kind of outplayed Trey Palmer, and Trey Palmer's been this guy the Bucs had sort of lingering around. He was not a starter at the start of the season, right? He was the sort of wide receiver 4 behind Jalen McMillan. And then he kind of got shoved into playing more last week because of all the injuries. And he hasn't done anything with his opportunity though, right? So there's two components of pass catcher production. You have to be on the field. And then when you're on the field, you have to do things that make the quarterback want you to throw the ball. And then you have to catch the ball. Sorry, there's 3. You have to catch the ball that's thrown to you. So Trey Palmer has not shown a consistent ability to earn targets when he's on the field. Right? Like Baker Mayfield attempted 50 passes last week. Trey Palmer had 2 targets. That is a 4% market share of targets for a guy who was he was on the field like 70% of the snaps or something. So that doesn't mean he can't ever hit, right? But like that's not exactly an inspiring this guy's earning targets over here. He's not, right? Jarrett earned 3 targets. He caught all 3 for 58 yards. All 3 of them were long targets too, right? Like he got three catches for 58 yards, but his longest catch was 20. So like he delivered in his opportunity that he got. And so the logical thing on a team that is desperate for pass catchers is to perhaps give some more opportunity. So this could go chalky if either Sterling Shepard or Jalen McMillan are ruled out. And then Rakim Jarrett becomes the clear next man up and probably starts pushing up in ownership. My hope is that they aren't. My hope is that they both play and that Jarrett comes in at like 10% as a wide receiver 4, but that he maybe closes the gap in snaps between him and Palmer, which I think is a plausible outcome.
Oh yeah, I like, yeah, definitely.
And that also lets us afford one Baker Mayfield with our final pick. Dude. And it's the Bucs are so spread out. Like if you go look at Baker Mayfield's 50 dropbacks last week, he threw to like 9 different guys. I think this is off the top of my head, but a bunch. He threw to there were 4 wide receivers, 2 tight ends, 3 running backs got targets. I think so 9. So like Baker Mayfield is the best Bucs passing option by himself because that it's so easy to spread the ball out among all those guys, and it's so hard to tell where the ball is possibly going to go. Do you really want to pay $8,400 for Kate Otten?
Exactly.
Like, you can pay $400 more for Travis Kelce. Like, come on, what are we doing? And so it's just hard to justify some of the cost of some of the Bucs guys, and it's hard to know where they're going to go. So I just want to have Baker Mayfield, where I think we can be confident that if the Bucs passing game succeeds, it's going to go enough through him that he's going to get, he's going to hit. And I actually think you can play him naked, which is odd in Showdown for quarterback, but I think you can because I think it's possible that, the production is spread so far around that no other pass catcher gets there. But in this lineup, I like Jarrett as kind of a sneaky option. And again, he won't be sneaky if McMillan or Shepard are out. But for now, he looks like kind of a sneaky option. He's going to be 10%-ish, but that's not that high. And I think he could go from a 20% snap share to a 50% snap share. He's not going to become the wide receiver 1, right? We have to temper expectations, but he could have a 50% snap share and 5 targets, 6 targets as kind of a high-end outcome for him, which at 10% ownership and $2,000 salary is pretty darn good. And I will say that I tried to make this roster. I almost made it. I tried very hard to make it different in a couple ways because what I do, one of my first steps in looking at showdowns is I pop into an optimizer and load up a couple of different sets of projections and just hit run and see what happens. And I see how much I like the lineup. And if I don't like the lineup very much that it spits out, then I'm like, cool. A lot of people are going to play that lineup or lineups very close to it. And so if I don't like that, no big deal. I don't have to worry about it too much, right? They're going to play lineups that I'm not on anyway. However, in this particular showdown, I really liked the lineup it spat out. It was Mahomes captain. It was Mahomes captain, Hunt, Mayfield, Kelce. So the 4 core guys that we talked about. And then it was Trey Palmer and Noah Gray. And those 2 guys are reasonable plays, right? Like Noah Gray, I think, is a totally fine play. Trey Palmer is a little shakier, but like overall that lineup was really strong. And I was like, well, crap, because I like that lineup. And I have to figure out some ways to get different. And I was like, the easiest way is don't captain Mahomes and switch someone else. So I started playing around with what if I captain Hunt? What if I captain Kelce? And then but then I was like, okay, but also that like Gray Palmer combination is probably going to be a popular combination if you roster the 4 expensive guys are kind of clustered in salary. And so I was thinking, if you roster 4 expensive guys, it almost doesn't matter who you put at captain. That Palmer Gray pairing is going to be popular as a last 2 to fit the 4 expensive guys. And so I was like, okay, I have to find a different pairing than Palmer Gray. And so I was like messing around with different ones, and I landed on Rakim Jarrett. But there's other pairings you could do down there, right? There's other viable pairings you could do. You could use Hardman, you could use Tucker, you could use Gray, you could use Watson. There's a lot of plays down there. They're all kind of punty, right? They're all kind of like thin, low floor. But you can mess around with different combinations of those. And that's probably how I'm going to approach this, right? It's a lot of lineups with these core 4 expensive guys, and then, trying to mix and match the 2v2s at the bottom around them. So that's my main strategy behind I'm approaching this one.
Absolutely love it, man. Great stuff. And love how you just kind of described approaching it with the optimizer, looking at it and seeing if you like it versus, and then how you go from there. So great stuff, Xandamere. And for the podcast, those listening on the pod, the lineup that we landed on was Kelce at the captain with Mahomes, Hunt, Harrison Butker, Rakim Jarrett, and Baker Mayfield. Xandamere, good stuff, man. I just feel like this episode was packed with just nuggets and valuable information. So thanks so much for joining us, being, every week. This is fun for me, and I feel like I learn a lot. So good luck tonight, and to all of you watching, good luck tonight, Xandamere. Thanks for all your knowledge, man.
As always, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure, and good luck to you as well.
See you guys next time.